Feeding's probably one of the most challenging parts to get going in the first 3 months. So when your baby's in the hospital, it doesn't really have a routine. Everything's really quite simple. When you get home around the 2nd week, life really starts to change for the baby with the behaviour as well with the feeding patterns. So today we're going to go through a lot of those strategies that I hope will help you understand what your baby is really wanting and what their changes mean. When you leave the hospital, your milk really hasn't even established because it doesn't come in until day 3, as we know. So for people that are in special care, yes, you've already been through that journey. Your milk has come in while you were in hospital still. But for most of the parents that leave hospital, that doesn't happen until you get home. So around day 3 or 4, when the milk starts to come in, your breasts feel very full and they stay that way for the first couple of weeks. A lot of people get really concerned that their milk supply has dropped from the 2-week mark because their breasts suddenly start to feel softer and they're worried that their milk has run out. It's actually very, very normal, and your breasts don't stay large and full for the whole time that you're feeding. So there's no need to panic, there's still plenty of milk there. It takes 6 weeks for your milk supply to fully establish. So you're only in the early phases of that, and there's many changes that your baby has to go through throughout that 6-week period. So to feel really comfortable with your milk supply, it's about learning your confidence of, has my baby actually had enough or not? That's going to take you possibly up to 8 weeks to feel really confident with. From about 2 weeks on, that's usually when the babies start to have their very first growth spurt. And growth spurts happen all the way through their life, obviously, but around every 2 weeks, right up until 3 months of life. So it might not be necessarily 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks. Sometimes it's at 3.5 weeks. Sometimes it's just over 4 weeks. So it doesn't just typically follow a set rule of every fortnight. So how do we know that the baby's having a growth spurt? Your baby will actually want to feed more frequently. So you'll be quite used to them feeding them, and they'll sleep for 3 or 4 hours in the daytime. Then all of a sudden they start to throw in this pattern of they're waking up at 2 hours or 2.5 hours. And you'll think that's a bit different to what's been going on. They're having a growth spurt. The only way they can tell your body to make more milk is to actually be at the breast and stimulate and make more milk. If you're bottle feeding, obviously they may need to take more amounts in the formula. How do we know at this point that whether the baby's actually hungry or whether they've got pain? Because around exactly the same time, between 2 weeks and 6 weeks, babies have a lot of gut development and they get what we call lactose overload. So with lactose overload, it has got nothing to do with mum's diet. It's actually the lactose from the breast milk. The baby's having trouble trying to break it down as quickly as they're getting it. Lactose is essential for brain growth, so that's why breastfed babies are smarter. They need the lactose for their brain to grow. It's important, but it causes a lot of pain in their bowel. It's not wind pain, it's not burping pain, it's actually bowel pain. So we have to work out, is the baby hungry or not? Because as you found, when they're crying, the obvious thing to do is to feed them, but we need to be sure that they're really hungry. So how do we determine that? You'll actually have some different signs. So your feeding cues, your baby is wide awake, their eyes are open, and they'll bring their hands up to their mouth. So they'll be putting their hands up there and they'll be sucking like that. If their eyes are closed and their legs are pulling up towards their stomach, and then they have a cry and then they'll settle back down again, chances are that it's not actually hunger. They may have a pain. Now you can put your baby on the breast. If they will attach, they will stay there and they'll do the non-nutritive sucking. So they're not sucking for a feed, they're just sucking to calm themselves. that's perfectly fine. If they're doing it all of the time, we can get quite confused and think, my baby's feeding all of the time. Is this actually what it needs? So what's lactose overload? Lactose overload doesn't mean that your baby is lactose intolerant, that you can quite commonly see on social media. So you don't change your diet unless a health professional has actually advised you to do so. And there's many steps that we take before we would do that. Lactose overload will give your baby very loose, watery stools. So they'll be pooing very, very frequently, and you'll be concerned that they've either got gastro or they've got what we call lactose overload and you've eaten something in your diet. That's not the case. So with lactose overload, it starts at 2 weeks and it hits its peak around 6 weeks because your milk supply is still establishing. So you don't change anything at this point. We have to learn how to help our babies, support them through this uncomfortable time. That's really distressing as a parent. So we're going to talk about some different strategies that you can use to find out how to settle your baby through this difficult time. When your baby has lactose overload starting to occur, you'll notice they'll be feeding at the breast and then all of a sudden they'll start to get a little bit twitchy and wriggly at the breast. Their hand will come up, they may start to push in at the breast or pull back with their head. Their face will go a little bit red and blotchy. Then you'll notice that their legs will start to come up towards their stomach. So they may just bring one leg up at a time and wriggle around and try and come off the breast. At that point, take them off the breast. Don't keep them there. Don't need to force them to stay there. You'll sit them up and you'll try to give them a burp. They'll still be really uncomfortable and they'll be drawing their legs up quite intensely, bringing their hands up towards their face and trying to suck on their hands, like so. Putting them up over your shoulder can be very good, and dads are very good at doing this part. So putting them up there and just rubbing slowly up one way. Patting like this won't do any good. That's actually too fast and it's more stressful for them. So we've got to slow things down. Now they're still remaining quite distressed. Their legs are drawing up towards their stomach a lot. They're crying, really a high-pitched cry. So at this point it's not working while you're holding them in your arms. So the next step is that you may need to actually put them down and wrap them because they're becoming very, very distressed. When your baby's getting really distressed, the next step will be to check their nappy, obviously, to see if they've done more poo. And their arms will be starting to move around a lot more. Their legs will be coming up while you're changing their nappy, etc. Their eyes will be closed, they'll be looking away from you, and they'll have a very high-pitched cry. By putting your hands over their hands, across their chest, lowering your voice and talking very softly and gently and saying their name slowly over and over and over will help them calm down slightly. If that's not working, you actually need to use a wrap to contain their arms because they're going to get louder and faster. So we have a flap folded at the top of the wrap. You bring their arms up near their face where they want them to be. Bring the wrap across the top of their arm and hold it in place with your finger in their armpit as you bring across the wrap over their body. Same on the other side. Arm up near their face, bring the wrap over their arm, finger into the armpit and bring the wrap across their body. Your baby then is nice and secure. They're not going to like laying on their back at this point. So you may find when they're in pain like this, you actually need to stay with them and settle them on their side. Around 2 to 6 weeks as well is the time that babies also get reflux. Now all babies develop reflux to some degree or another, but it doesn't mean that they necessarily need medication to help them with that. The more stressed they become, they will actually develop more reflux. So the upright position is really good to help soothe them. And you use the people, your support people around you to give you a break. Because quite often for mum, the baby will be bobbing its head around and looking for a feed again. We know they've had a good feed, so that's not what they need. We've wrapped them up. You'll rub up their back nice and slowly. You may sing to them. You may support their feet. That may help them a little bit as well during this time. And just rock very gently and calmly. If you're going very fast, remember that's going to stimulate the baby more. So they like to be upright, but if they've got pain, they're not going to want to lay on their back. Nobody likes laying on their back, and think about when you gave birth, you weren't on your back to do that. So the babies are exactly the same. You tend to want to lay on your side. So we will actually put the baby down on the side. Doesn't matter which side, the left side is sometimes helpful. And you just hold their top arm and you're going to just pat them very gently. And again, remember that they can hear you and focus about an arm's length away. So you don't need to come in really close. Just stand about an arm's length away, calm your voice and talk very gently and softly to your baby. You may find that they're looking to suck, and that's the way that they'll actually calm themselves down. So it might be at this point that you use a clean finger in their mouth to have a little suck, just to help them calm. Or if they can find their own hand, that's perfect. So that's how we help them get off to sleep. You don't just take your hands straight off and leave them be. They're going to feel really insecure. So leave a hand on, stop your patting, leave the hand on, talk very calmly, slowly, time for sleep, time for sleep. Then ease off your hand and your baby will stay, hopefully, asleep. That should only take 5-10 minutes at the maximum. If they're still crying, you are obviously going to pick them up and calm them. Then when they're calm again, it's the same routine back down again. We don't want to be settling in your arms all of the time from 2 to 6 weeks onwards. Once your baby has settled and you can see they've gone to sleep, you need to wait until they're in a deep sleep. So they're very peaceful, they're not moving, their arm may be floppy, and we do not leave them on their side to sleep for SIDS reasons. So you actually come in and you just very gently turn their hips through so that they're on their back. At this point it won't matter if you loosen off their wraps slightly so that they can move. So from 2 weeks on is when a lot of people give up their feeding because it gets quite challenging and not knowing what your baby's wanting to do. If you can get through this period, it's beneficial in the long run. Your feeding will get quicker. At the moment it takes around an hour, but by 3 months of age, your baby will really only feed for about 5 minutes. So you can't warm a bottle up in that time. So it is worth sticking with it so that you get through to the better parts. If you're to get sick and develop maybe the flu or gastro, you start vomiting and diarrhea, don't stop breastfeeding. Your breastfeeding is protective against your baby becoming sick. A lot of people will stop feeding when they get really sick. They don't understand that when you get sick, you develop antibodies in your milk to protect your baby from getting sick. Also, if your partner's a bit sick too, you can put some milk into their coffee without them knowing it. Maybe might get away with that. So in the output, what do we expect for their output when they're maturing and getting older? Lots and lots of frequent wet nappies, at least 6 a day, every day. And you'll have at least 1 to 2 poos a day. I know you'll get more than that in the early weeks, but from around 6 weeks, your baby may only start to have a poo once every 2 or 3 days if they're breastfed. Again, this is normal and you don't need to worry. Your baby will eventually have a poo. If you've chosen to bottle feed your baby, either breast milk or formula, remember it's important to also keep swapping arms. So you and your partner might do opposite arms. You don't have to swap every feed, but just throughout the day or every second day, make sure you're swapping it over. So your partner may feed the baby in his left arm and you may hold the baby in your right arm to feed the baby. So as long as you're doing that, that's really good development for the baby's brain. They get stimulated on both sides, as well as it helps the shape of the baby's head as well. Let's recap on the key points for feeding and the changes from 2 weeks right through to 3 months. So your baby will have growth spurts, and that may be every fortnight. Not directly, but roughly every fortnight, and they will last 2 days, day and night, of frequent feeding to make more milk. Normal. Your breasts are going to change, so they won't stay full from around 2 weeks on. They'll actually start to soften up and feel a bit more like normal breasts. That's normal as well. Your milk supply is still fine at that point. The next key point is the lactose overload, which starts from 2 weeks of age and again at 6 weeks of age. Don't change your diet. If you're having trouble with it, make sure you get some help from professionals. But the key is to actually help your baby settle when they're uncomfortable in their tummy. Most parents are aware that our babies need to have tummy time, and they think that tummy time is good up here on the chest, which it is, and there's nothing wrong with laying back and having a cuddle or doing exercises with your baby on your chest like that. We need our babies really from the time that they're born, but especially from 2 weeks on, doing tummy time on a change mat or a firm surface, which might be when they're playing, when you're playing on their mats on the floor. Why do we need to do it? We need these muscles in the back of their neck to actually strengthen, so that will help them to suck and swallow, and it also gives us the reassurance that if our babies do vomit or they do roll in at night in their sleep, they're actually able to move their head. They're able to do that from before they're born. So it's really a good thing to let parents and grandparents know that this baby can move their head. So the idea is that you don't leave them on their tummy for very long, and you do it before the feed. So with each nappy change in the daytime, turn them over onto their mat that you've changed them on their change table, put their arms out to the side, and they will turn their head one way or the other. You don't have to do that for them. They'll go quite blotchy, and they might try and crawl. They might try and move and crawl, or they might bring their hands up around their face and suck, because they're sucking to help control and calm themselves down. They need to only do that for about 10 to 30 seconds at the most. Then you can pick them up and continue to give them a nice feed.